A group of Western and Midwestern senators wants the ATF to stop making stupid rules. Senator Pete Ricketts from Nebraska and a group of other senators from South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, states out west, have come together to petition the Supreme Court and the Biden administration to stop the ATF from making arbitrary rule changes which have the effect of law and put people, cross them up, make them into felons. Who knows? All of this is spiraling out of the bump stock ruling from the ATF. Now, according to what these senators have put together in their petition, the ATF had ruled 10 times over 11 years that bump stocks were legal. Now, the ATF says they're not legal. They just changed their mind. Said under the NFA, the National Firearms Act, which defined machine guns back in 1934, the ATF is now saying that bump stocks are close enough to machine guns, and they have completely changed the rule, making them illegal. And everyone knows that this came out of a tragic case in Las Vegas where a shooter used bump stocks to kill more than 50 people during a music festival in Las Vegas. We don't disagree with the fact that this was a terrible tragedy. We do disagree with the fact that it was the fault of the bump stock. We're putting the blame on the bump stock, not on the crazy person who committed the act, not on this person who decided that he needed to shoot a whole bunch of people. And as a result of that, the ATF has decided just like, well, bump stocks are now illegal. But it happens with the change of administration. And this is where the senators are getting really upset. Because if every new president puts in a new ATF director or somebody new at the Department of Justice, and that changes the law, that's taking away the law writing capabilities from Congress, which is supposed to create the laws. The executive branch, that's where the ATF lives, all the bureaucracies and stuff like that, are supposed to enforce the laws. Now, they do have a little leniency on how they interpret the law, but not so much that they should completely flip-flop at 180 degrees because a new administration is in town. And that's what these senators are calling out and asking that the Biden administration and the Supreme Court put a stop to this sort of stuff. Now, there's some stuff I need to read right from this 41-page document to make sure that everybody understands it. Right here, the BATFE's final rule argues in effect that bump stocks are of kindred character to machine guns, but BTF had made 10 previous determinations over 11 years that bump stocks are not machine guns as defined by the NFA. They do not cause more than one bullet to leave the firearm with a single function of the trigger. When a rulemaking agency, this is really important, when a rulemaking agency cannot agree with itself on a statute's meaning, this court should construe the criminal statute narrowly and apply the rule of lenity using the reasonable doubt standard. The court should hold the BATF regulation invalid. That's just one of the elements that they put together on this brief when they sent it over to the court. The senators went on to say that when a criminal law implicates constitutional concerns, a law must be, and here I'm going to read this again, sufficiently clear so as to allow persons of ordinary intelligence a reasonable opportunity to know what is prohibited. Now think about that for a minute. The ATF said over the course of 11 years, bump stocks were legal, and then they just changed their mind. So people of ordinary intelligence did not have a reasonable opportunity to know what was legal or not legal because we had a change of administration, we got a new president, he appointed a new ATF director, and the ATF decided, nope, these things are now illegal. That's not right, and it's not fair. And this 44-page document they sent over went on to describe a situation which would be unthinkable today, and I'm kind of chuckling because back in 1862, there were draft riots in New York City. People were rioting against being drafted into the army to fight in the Civil War. And they were just trashing the city up and down the streets. And guess who made the most pointed stand. The staff of the New York Times mounted Gatling guns on their building, and from their windows, they had 3 Gatling guns, and the remaining staff members of the New York Times were stationed with rifles to stop the rioters. Now, the discussion about this, first of all, the fact that the New York Times would not now do anything to protect gun rights. I mean, think about that. It's silly. But the idea became the central focus of, is a Gatling gun a machine gun? Because it operated with a hand crank, and it only fired 1 round for each operation of the trigger, even though the hand crank was moving 6 barrels and was allowing this gun to fire hundreds of rounds per minute from its box magazine. So, if you're thinking about this and the change in the position of the ATF now is a hand crank, I believe the company was BMF. They had the BMF activator, which you could clamp onto your trigger guard of your Ruger 1022 and crank the handle and it would fire really quickly. That was legal. Is that close enough to a machine gun, kindred to a machine gun, as the ATF says, to make that illegal now? And these changes in rules are getting law-abiding citizens in trouble because they want something that will make their gun fire faster. It's more fun at the range or something like that. I'm not going to say that the bump stock is amazing. It doesn't allow you to shoot really accurately or anything, but it is fun to use at the range. But it doesn't make it illegal according to the law. And that's what we're talking about. Who makes the law and who enforces the law? Congress needs to get together and make the law and set it clearly so that people of reasonable intelligence can understand what is prohibited. They're not doing that now. They're just handing that off to bureaucrats who are not elected. They're not accountable to the American voters. And they're just making rules that they flip-flop and change back and forth, and we can't have that. So this group of senators, oddly enough, they're from what people call the flyover states, where, conservatism still reigns supreme. This group of senators is reaching out and asking the Supreme Court and the Biden administration to stop this, to stop allowing bureaucrats to make rules. And it shouldn't just apply to the ATF. Any of these bureaus, any of these bureaucrats shouldn't be allowed to make rules that have the force of law unless a law is passed by Congress. That's what the legislative branch does. They're supposed to make the laws, and then the executive branch is supposed to enforce those laws. And the Supreme Court has made it very clear, as have lots of other courts of appeals, made it very clear that the law needs to be clear and simple so that people of reasonable intelligence know what is being prohibited. I hope we can get behind all these folks and support this stuff, because we need to be politically active. We need to make sure that this keeps going forward. We can't give away our freedoms every time there's a change in administration. We need to know what the law is so we don't end up on the wrong side of it just because somebody else got elected president. Now, before you go, if you think you're using the right caliber for self-defense, think again. And you might not even know it, but your ammo could be putting you at severe disadvantage when you pull the trigger. Click the link in the description below to watch this short, unbiased video comparing the top 4 self-defense calibers and see if you end up changing handguns.